My name is Darius Fanon, and I'm the head of the Think Tank Hub Geneva. And on behalf of the Think Tank Hub, I would like to welcome you all to this Think Tank talk dedicated to the topic of urban inequalities. So just maybe a few introductory words on the Think Tank Hub. The Think Tank Hub was founded in 2014. We've been celebrating our 7th anniversary this year. And it's an initiative undertaken by the think tank Voraus, the Swiss Forum on Foreign Policy, together with the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, the FDFA. The goal of the Think Tank Hub is to facilitate the involvement of evidence-based works of various organizations to policy discussions within the international Geneva ecosystem. And one of the main activities carried out by the Think Tank Hub is precisely the Think Tank Talk series. With the Think Tank Talks, what we try to achieve, what we like to do, is an event format where we have different experts invited to present their field of expertise to a diverse group of participants from the international Geneva ecosystem and from beyond. And the goal of this event format is to generate a debate, discuss different approaches and problem-solving techniques that can be applied to current issues we are facing in the topic selected for the talk. As I just mentioned, the Think Tank Talks are an event series, and we actually have been running them since 7 years, since the very beginning, on an amazing wide range of issues, spanning from labor market issues to urbanization, to women in sports, to the role of fintech to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as artificial intelligence or video games for foreign affairs. For those of you who haven't been to a Think Tank talk yet, I just wanted to let you know that this conference is recorded and is also broadcast live on our Facebook feed. And that participants are also welcome to use the chat, whether to ask questions or to share their contact info, and to actually use the chat also as a space to interact, in addition, of course, to just turning on your mic and your video later on during the Q&A to ask questions. And without further ado now, I would like to actually give the floor to Hannah Reinl, who's gonna moderate the Think Tank talk of today. Hannah, hello, the floor is yours.
So hi everyone, my name is Hannah. I'm the co-head of the Voraus Gender program, and I'm extremely excited to moderate this conversation today with our fantastic guest speaker, who I'll introduce in a moment. So yeah, just as you've seen, there's probably going to be some technical challenges. So if that happens, just bear with us. I think at this point we all learn to improvise around this whenever it happens. So let's talk cities and let's talk how we can make them inclusive. This topic is a topic that I think is just gaining traction and significance by the moment. We have, as you probably saw from the invite to this event, already 75% of the global population living in cities or urban areas. But at the same time, urban structures and facilities don't always suit or cater to the needs of the people living within them. And they tend to create or to reinforce existing inequalities. I did a little bit of research when preparing for this moderation, and I found out that 60% of the land that is projected to become urban by 2030 is yet to be built. And I think that's actually a number that I personally draw a lot of hope from, but it is a risk and an opportunity at the same time, because we can either choose to continue with business as usual and to further increase existing inequalities, or we can choose to stop, to take a pause, to take a step back and to reflect on how things have been done in the past and how we can improve them in the future. And especially acknowledge the key role that cities will inevitably play in shaping the social configurations of the years that are to come, and how we can turn this momentum into an opportunity for that. I don't think any event discussing a social or political topic these days can go without a reference to COVID-19. It is really present. And I think especially for this aspect, COVID-19, as with so many other social, economic, political, cultural factors, has really very brutally, I think, put a spotlight on the inequalities that exist. And I think also has reminded us that we tend to think of inequalities in terms of something that happens in the Southern Hemisphere, but to also really see that this is very much an issue that exists in front of our own doorstep, and that this is something that also in countries and cities of the global north, this is something we need to engage with. So today we'll be looking at the demographic challenges, the inequalities that cities across the world are facing. We'll hopefully map out a way forward as to how we can reduce these disparities. And the particular focus on this will be to put a gender lens onto these issues, but especially also to look at how we can design cities in a way that they serve the most vulnerable populations. So for that, we have a very exciting guest speaker, Giulia Maci. Welcome, Giulia. We're really, really happy to have you here. Giulia is actually joining us from Kathmandu today, which is very exciting, and we hope that the internet connection will work out well. Giulia is an international urbanist, a lecturer, and a program manager on the topic of cities, women's empowerment, and sustainable development. She's currently the head of the Cities for Women Global Program at the Cities Alliance that is hosted by UNOPS, the UN Office for Project Services. And she's also an associate at the Institute for Culture and Society of Western Sydney University. So Giulia has been focusing in her work of the past years on leading innovative strategies to create inclusive cities, and they are now implemented in more than 20 countries. Her work has been featured by a number of really, I think, renowned institutions, such as the German Architecture Center, the World Bank, and the UN Global Compact. And Giulia, I'm sure you have more to add to this little bio, but I think I'll just hand over to you to let you introduce yourself in a little more detail. And we're very excited to hear from you.
Thank you, Anna, for this introduction. I'm very happy to join this event, and thank you to the Four House also for this invitation. I've been to the Four House 3 years ago, I was saying just before, in person. So it's very nice to be back, even if it's online. But at least I'm able to connect also from far away. Yes, so just a quick maybe introduction about myself and also where I come from. So I worked on urban development and participatory urban development for many years, also in different capacities, also in the private sector, NGO, and also multilateral organizations. So I really saw also urban development from different perspectives, and I'm really convinced that we really need to collaborate much more and to really listen to what people and citizens are saying. So the local perspective and the participatory perspective is really key in order to develop inclusive cities. And it's really now the moment to act. So we cannot really lose time anymore. So when we talk about climate change, when we talk about gender equality, and the main challenges of today, I think starting with cities and urban planning can be really a powerful tool also to connect these different topic and these different challenges and give a kind of coherent response. Now I'm working at Cities Alliance. As Anna said, we are hosted by UNOPS, so we are a UN organization, but we are also a global partnership that includes national state, association of cities, NGOs, especially focusing on informal areas. So the part of the city that have been created fast by people to respond to a lack of answer and services and housing by the state or private sector. And so we focus on urban poverty, and we focus on delivering sustainable and inclusive urban development. I have a presentation to share. Let me see if it's working. Can you see it? Okay, so my entry point, and now I'm at Cities Alliance, I'm leading, exactly as Anna said, a program focusing on women. So it's called Cities for Women. But the whole point is that if we make cities better planned for women, we're making cities better for everyone. So really, the basis of this concept is the aspect of inclusive cities. I, of course, as a urban planner and architect, I love cities. And I think cities are also the places, and we can see with the type of urban demographics that the increase of people moving to cities, the migration towards cities, that cities are the place where people move to look for a job, opportunities, civic rights, cultural exchange, and to also meet diversity. So cities are fantastic places for opportunity and privilege, but the current way that most of the cities right now are built or planned means that this privilege, this opportunity are not distributed equally. And there are entire groups, social groups, that cannot have access to these opportunities. So I think this is quite clear now with COVID, no? So on one end, I think we realize the power of cities now that we don't have anymore, we haven't had access to certain facilities. So the urban life has been almost in a situation of crisis in the past 2 years. Now we also question really what a city is, I think. But also we realized that how the inequalities are also shaping our cities and are built into our city. You know, there are people that could simply work from home or even find a way and work from remote location. And there are people that they have lost their jobs, they had to stay, they have been exposed to risks. And especially the people, for example, working in informal economy, which is the majority, in fact, of the urban population works in informal economy, they've been exposed to health risk, to economic risk. So they suffered a lot from this crisis. So it's really the time, I think, to act and to take a position on that. So it's really, this topic, I think, is really timing somehow. And I think gender inequalities are really a kind of good entry point. Normally we don't, there is not a lot of studies and data about that, but it's a good perspective and entry point to look at cities, accessibility and rights, and how the city's accessibility intersect also different type of identities. So age, ethnic belonging, sexual preferences, and disabilities. So from the gender perspective, you can really respond and understand how different people live the urban spaces, because we don't have the same experiences, no? A woman in her 90s has not the same urban experience than a teenager or a refugee that doesn't even have a permit. So really how we experience is different, and we have to take into account these different experiences. And I strongly believe from my work, I can see that if you start with women, you can somehow understand all these different perspectives. Where are these inequalities, gender inequalities in cities? They are everywhere. And we are somehow used to them. So we really need almost new eyes to look at them and recognize them. They are in public spaces, for instance. It's quite obvious. No? There is a lot of talk about safety. So women still feel uncomfortable and unsafe in urban public space. This is due to a real risk to be sexually harassed in public spaces. There are alarming data, for example, coming from everywhere, I have to say, also from Europe and from everywhere. But when we look at, for example, this data, Rabat in Morocco, 92% of women have experienced sexual harassment in public space. So there is a risk, but there is a social and cultural construction that influence also the ability and the freedom of women in public space. So traditionally, the domestic space is the space of women, and then the public space is the space for men. So the way public spaces are designed, are conceived, are experienced, really reflect the needs and aspiration of the most powerful of men. So public space, safety, the economic inclusion that of course is strictly linked to the public space. So the fact that still we are far from having the same economic engagement in cities means that women work less, they go, or they are less protected, let's say. So they also have less time, less possibility to also go into public space and access to cities. The city have what we call the right to the city. And if you look, for example, we work a lot in informal settlements, as I said, and women represent 92% of informally employed people. So it's basically the ones that are more exposed, also during the COVID situation, to risks. So this of course includes care work that is still not recognized. And of course, during COVID, this became extremely evident that this is a work that we need and as a value, economic value, that is not recognized. House-based work, and also, for example, all the aspect of city vendors. Mostly city vendors in cities are women. So this means that also during the COVID situation, they had to go to markets and more exposed to the risk of getting infected. And we saw, for example, we have been working in Uganda, just a little story. What happened is that in Uganda, the government put in place a very strict lockdown. And if you were working in a market, you had to sleep in the market. You couldn't go home with your family. This was last year. And this, of course, the result was that many women were in fact, the food vendors. They had to sleep in the market, and they were more exposed to sexual violence. So there was an increase of other forms of violence and harassment. And of course, the malaria, also more exposed to the malaria. So this is the complexity of all these type of inequalities. Economic inclusion means also access to land, which is an extremely important, of course, issue in cities. And globally, women account only for 15%, so lower than Latin America, in fact, of landowners. This was a mistake. So this means that they have less access to housing. So when we also talk about domestic violence, for instance, they don't own the land, they don't own the housing, so they cannot leave the houses. So when we talk about domestic violence, we should really think and look at the whole picture. And access to land is key, also for food production. Women are more, in general, globally, the ones that produce 60%, I think, of the food, but they have less access to land to produce it. So this is a bit the circle of inequalities. Speaking about land, we talk also about basic services. This is a key priority when we talk about inclusive cities in the future. Give access to wash facilities, basic services. Still, a lot of people in the world don't have access to decent toilet. And this is linked to so many other issues related to health, related to safety. And women are the ones that have less access to toilets, especially decent and designed and conceived for them. Even in Europe, we think about how public toilets are designed. They don't take into account the specific needs of women. So this is a main topic. We're working a lot on this. And another example of basic services, of course, water. Then women are responsible again to water collection in the vast majority of the household. So they have to do multiple trips every day to collect water. So this means less time for other activities like education, jobs, for themselves, to recreation. And with the climate change, so in case of droughts, for instance, this will have a bigger impact on, in fact, women empowerment, because they will need to walk even longer distance. And of course, climate change has a big gender impact, as you probably know, no? So also in terms of flooding, in terms of disasters, we can always see in terms of data that the ones that are more impacted by also earthquake and disasters are again women. So they're more vulnerable, but at the same time, they are the first responder. They are in charge, for example, of the energy and the cooking, of course, at home. So they make also decision at home regarding climate adaptation solution. And of course, and also in the disaster risk management, they are really at the forefront. So the key question is how to involve them also in the decision making, in adaptation plans, and so on. So basic services, and the last one, and I connect to the leadership, the political inclusion. We are still, this is well known, so women are leaders in their communities. During the past 2 years, we see these alliances have been active in different cities, also to provide support during COVID, and women were key to understand where, what were the needs, and where also vulnerable people were. So they knew their community, they were in touch with their community. So when you do a city plan, a strategy or a project, women are always key actors. But this stays always at the informal level, not always, but mostly. So there is really an issue in going from informal leadership to formal leadership, and only this has changed 10%, 15% of mayors worldwide are women. And even if we have women mayor, still they don't have by law. So for example, we're working in Tunisia, even in Nepal, where I am, no, women by law, they have to be either mayor and deputy mayor. So they are there, but they don't have the capacity and the space to really take decision, to have a space. So there is a lot to be done also in political inclusion. So this all connected, you can see that everything is connected. So you really need to have an integrated approach to that. And as I said at the beginning, I think planning can really give a very powerful tool, is a powerful tool to respond to this. And we have to go from a traditional city planning, which is mostly done by experts sitting in a room developing master plans, and these experts are mostly men. So cities that at the end the result is of course a city that respond to the needs of a certain group, to a future type of planning, which is gender inclusive, means that is based on community-based data, is open. It's very difficult right now to predict in a city what will happen in a few years. So we have to be very prepared, very flexible, having clear, for example, objective, but how we reach that objective needs to be flexible. Also, we talk a lot about, for example, ex post planning. Sometimes the cities are already developed and you need to intervene in existing places. So it's more about upgrading somehow, involving people, identifying priority to improve the existing condition, not like plan a new town, in fact. And of course, everything is about include the voices of the most marginalized, to really have spaces to include them. So I come to the point that I with which I started. So cities for women are in fact cities where there is equal access to the resources and opportunities, regardless of any gender identity and protected characteristics as physical ability, racial belonging, and class and social class. And we have been working in different cities. And when we have asked to women, okay, what are really the key priorities for you for the future development of your neighborhood? the type of suggestion, if you think about, there was women-only buses, better public spaces, better public transport, cycling lanes, and less, of course, community-based childcare services and so on. All this resonate with the idea of inclusive cities for everyone. And so this is a bit our work right now with the Cities for Women global program. We look at, we are working currently on different projects, focusing on different sectors. So as I said, the city strategies, women-led climate adaptation, entrepreneurship, leadership also at the local level, inclusive public space design, gender-sensitive municipal budget, which is a very important topic. So it's good to have a plan, but also how you really prioritize resources also at the local level to implement and to respond to specific needs. And gender-sensitive WASH. So WASH means sanitation and facilities and basic services. What we normally do in cities, we have developed a urban assessment framework. So it's basically an approach that we try to use in different places, and of course it's completely open and adaptable. But we try to use this in order to have also comparable data, and to also, this is something that also every time we learn also from our experiences and we adapt a bit. But in general, for us, it's very important, the engagement. So really, when we start in a place, we need to engage the right people, the right stakeholders, and especially women's group. And then the assessment, so collect data. Data are key, we don't have enough data. And of course, where there is especially a lack of qualitative data. So data based on communities, perspective and experiences. So we focus on that. And then we try always to facilitate, especially through also local partners, local experts, a co-creation process where we identify, in fact, responses, and then we pilot. So what I've learned also from this experience that sometimes city authority, local politicians are resistant to do something, for example, on gender or inclusivity. They don't see it. They want to have something concrete, a return, and of course the political re-election. And you have to show to them through data and to pilot that in fact, if you start with including different voices, you start with women at the end, you will have outcome in terms of economic development, in terms of well-being in a broader term. So piloting is key. And then of course, the aspect of evaluation and communication, or better, advocacy. So for us as a also global organization, it's very important to use what we are doing to advocate with policymakers, especially global one, donors, to invest more money at the local level and to invest more money in this kind of community actions and women-led actions. Sex disaggregated data are key. And as I said, we always collect data in a participatory way. So we also adapted certain tools that have been used already by many cities related to, in fact, collecting community-based data and experiences. We adapted to the context also of the Global South. So we use, for example, we organize women's safety audit, means going around the neighborhood with women and looking at their daily itinerary and understand what make them feel more uncomfortable or unsafe. The same, we draw with them. So we use a lot of drawing and images to share also experiences about also what women from that community like the most in that neighborhood or list and share these experiences. It's very important to do this. So the normal way of engaging people in cities sometimes is very formal. And you have these meetings always organized in a certain time of the day, and this doesn't allow really the participation of women. So women are normally they don't take part, and if they are there, they don't have really enough space to participate. So what we do is also organizing this type of work and this exchange in a more informal way, and also different time of the day to allow really the participation of different groups, especially from marginalized community. We organize the meeting in the neighborhood as well. So we work also in informal settlements. And then other tools are, for example, gender-based community mapping, really also there, really mapping the urban space on the use from a gender perspective. And through this engagement, through this assessment, and also different workshops and meetings, we try to start with a city profile that really visualize immediately what are the gaps in the city, what are the policy area that needs to be prioritized. So we look at economic engagement, we develop different indicators and sub-indicators and questions, human and social capital, and institutional political engagement, and precondition or inclusive urban development. So for instance, preconditions to have inclusive cities is safety, tolerance, mobility, to be able to move around, trust and transparency, technology, and yes, that's it. And we immediately, you can see immediately, now we combine the data, it's mostly qualitative data, and we identify where we can develop some ideas and when we can do a pilot. This is also a tool for stakeholder engagement, really to engage in a conversation with local authorities, with donors, and with other key stakeholders. I don't know if there are questions on this. I've been quite fast. It's just a result of a process. So I don't know if it was clear.
For the moment, no questions, but if something comes in, I'll let you know.
Thank you. So in this year, we apply this approach in different locations. So mainly in Africa, very different cities, and but more or less the approach was quite similar. The outcome is very different, and there will be more cities in the next year. Of course, during COVID, we try to use, this is what I think is important, we try to test also online mechanisms to engage people. So using also WhatsApp groups in local languages, online questionnaires, also going to the community, providing also computer for smaller groups, use radio also to engage local radio. So we are experimenting. I think we are not yet there. I think still there are a lot of limits. So we were used to engage people on the ground physically. So it's been quite challenging during the COVID to do this participatory process. So it's a big question also for the future, how we do it in a meaningful way, in a way that is inclusive and accessible to everyone. And I want to share the example, which is concrete and can maybe lead to a conversation or discussion in Tunisia. It's a program that is called Femme Medina and started this year and has 3 components. One is the participatory assessment of the Medina of Tunis. So we work in the city center, the historical part of Tunis, which is also happens to be one of the poorest areas and one of the most traditional in terms of cultural background and religious background. And based on this, we identify like public space intervention, and then the next step will be really to export the sport, to enlarge this experience to other cities in Tunisia. So around 1,500 women are benefiting or are involved in this process. What we did, we have already concluded the assessment part. As I explained, we organize this type of works, meetings in the Medina. We engage really with different type of groups. And what the city didn't have was a digital map. So everything was really on paper. So we tried to combine this data on digital maps where we could immediately identify a really specific location for intervention. And we did these maps for different topics, more or less the ones that have been identified also in the profile. This is, for example, the security map. The safety is the perception, of course. Then we have also data about really security, not much on the Medina. So this is based more on the perception of women. And you can identify already which are the areas that are considered less safe. We did also for cultural religious entertainment. So where women goes to meet others, to access to cultural facilities. And we did it also for economic, living conditions, and so on. And then we combine all this information and we identify specific location. And once we did that, we of course engaged, again, different women and different stakeholders to develop an intervention. These are pilot interventions that are quite punctual. So at the same time, we also develop a strategy for the city of Tunis to really think about the redevelopment of the Medina with this inclusive approach, which is quite new. So there are also people from the city of Tunis that they said, well, we never realized that women have different needs. So we always think about citizens, but it's very different the way women perceive and live a public space. So for instance, one of the main issues is the access to cultural facilities. So there are, for example, libraries, but where women, for one reason to another, they don't go. And also, in general, places for children, because still, of course, women are the most responsible for taking care of the children. So if you are able to bring your children a space, you can also interact with other women. So this is the Medina. And another topic was, which was very interesting and surprising, is the heritage aspect, because in Tunis, many women in the past have contributed to the history and to the development of the city, but there is very little recognition in terms of monument, streets name, and so on. And I think this is the same in every city. So we also developed like a plan with different paths and walks, cultural walks that connect new public space with also this memory and history, to understand. So with different groups, we came up with different projects. So as I said, playground, library for girls, places for training for new jobs, media place to have access to internet and have, watch movies and meet, meeting places and so on. And now we are with the city of Tunis, we are implementing already the space. So we are now in the phase of implementation of the space. And so this is for Tunisia. In Liberia, we did a very similar approach, but focusing more on informal settlements. Liberia, we work in Monrovia, city capital, and Liberia is one of the poorest countries in the world. And also there, we really started last year doing survey also online, engaging people on the ground, and we developed the city development strategy for the city of Monrovia with a strong gender focus. And there, the big issue that came out was safety. And we did also a mapping of the informal settlements with the gender mapping that I was describing before. And the main issue is safety and access to water. So what we did was to engage women in designing, building water kiosks in different communities. And the water kiosk has also a space, have been designed with a space also for women to sell small products. And women in the process have been also trained on water management. So this means also for them to have a completely different role in their community, because if you manage water, you became really visible and important. And so these are all the different engagement activities that I was talking about. And now, like a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the water kiosk have been also delivered to women. So I wanted to share these two examples because this shows also that in a short time, even if in the COVID situation, you can deliver, you can have something concrete. And through this, you can send a powerful message, and you can also engage more donors and more people to scale up. So now in Tunisia, we want to replicate this in, as I said, in many other cities. And so there is this, and it's very important also, if you engage people, they don't have a lot of time. And they have been also engaged in so many events, also by donors and by international actors. And they want to see results. So you need really, there is a kind of trust relations. You need to give something back quickly. Then, of course, you can have also, and this is very important, the long-term policy framework. So engaging also in the long term, be present on the ground, not just do one thing and leave. So we are also trying always to, for example, to create local office and establish local relationship. This was also, of course, during COVID, since we were already working in informal settlements, we developed also a COVID response plan and many messages also really focusing on women and the gender implication of the crisis. So talking about violence, talking about sharing responsibility at home, and waste management and hygienic conditions. So as I said, we try, and I invite all of you to access, and I can share a link also afterwards if you're interested. We always combine in publications, in reports, to be able to share this finding in a kind of concrete and simple way, not too technical, as I try to do today. And of course, I'm happy to share this experience with many people and to engage with everyone who wants to work on this and to create a new collaboration. So it's also a great opportunity for me to be here today. And if I want to finish with this is Kathmandu. This is really outside my window. This is a picture that I took yesterday, and you can see immediately the challenge very, very concretely. So this is still a very nice area. So in terms of accessibility, public space, mobility, infrastructure, and everything. And in Kathmandu, currently, we are working on building a program in 7 cities where there is a woman mayor to develop city strategy, inclusive and for priority infrastructures focusing on inclusivity, especially marginalized groups and women from marginalized communities. So we're engaging a lot these days with different actors, and I really hope to see something concrete coming up soon or starting soon. So thank you. This is that's all, and I'm open to have a conversation, exchange, and of course, Anna, if you have any questions, I'm happy to respond. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Giulia, for this truly inspiring presentation and the inspiring work that you're doing in general. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. I already have a sense that the hour we allocated might be a little too short, but this is great to just hopefully get the conversation started. I did tell Giulia beforehand that I'll have to be careful not to monopolize this conversation after her presentation, because I'm so fascinated by the topic. And I believe part of what you said really, really resonated with this initial sense of fascination that I had when I got into the topic of urban space, urban design, because it was such a fundamental paradigm shift for me to understand that social, or like space, urban space, doesn't only reflect the societal, it actually also produces this feedback loop is ongoing between the two, and really shapes the reality of people's lives. And I think the moment you start accepting that and understanding that cities are more than brick on brick and building next to building, you can't really unthink it. Like there's no step backwards from that. And then to ask these questions of, all these points that you mentioned, who has the jure, but also the de facto rights to public space, who's involved in the decision-making processes in designing these spaces, how do urban structures influence the range of activities, but also the way people interact with each other and move through these spaces, and like looking at all of this with gender maybe as a starting point, but then really bouncing off from that into other aspects and really applying an intersectional lens and looking at how different societal dimensions and experiences maybe also of discrimination interact and create this compounding system of factors that all shape our realities. That's really fascinating. And I think engaging with these questions is, coming back to what we said in the beginning, really key in promoting the Agenda 2030. So I'll open this up to questions from the audience. If you want to, you can just raise your hand and unmute yourself, or if you feel more comfortable, especially also a reminder that this is a recording, you can also just type your question in the chat and I'll read it out loud. But I'll just get started, and I have lots of questions. But I think that the first thing that came to my mind and everything that you said, and especially also in the context of COP26 just having taken place, how can we ensure, maybe keyword climate justice, that as we think sustainability around the future of urban design, that we actually mainstream environmental concerns in the way we design and we develop the cities of the future in a way that does not reinforce existing social inequalities?
Yes, thank you. So this is an important question. So it's not only about climate change or response to climate change, but also it's really about asking who is paying the cost of climate change, you know? And also from COP26 came out, you know, that in fact there are countries and group like the entire population that are basically the most affected, and they're ones that less contributed to the situation we are in. So there is really a question of supporting, investing, especially investing on supporting this population. On one hand, mitigate, of course, we have to be much more brave and in mitigating our consumption and how we are affecting climate change. On the other hand, really investing on adaptation. There is not enough investment on adaptation, especially at the community level, at city level. And investing means, in my view, not loans, but really supporting, understanding what is happening in the community level and city level, what the cities are already doing, and supporting these initiatives, and trying also to, of course, if it's possible, to share experience and support local actions, and because they know what is best for them, no? So really understand. And what was also missing a bit at COP26, has been said by everyone, is really to bridge the gap between policymakers and really people on the ground facing the issues.
Thank you, Giulia. Again, invitation to whoever has a question to just go ahead, raise your hand and ask it out loud, or to put your question in the chat.
Thank you, Giulia, for the great presentation. You have, brilliantly showcased how city infrastructures could help shape how people, interact among themselves. And so, as a consequence of that, having even, creating an impact on the culture. So my question now, and you stated actually in your presentation that, the political engagement is important, right, to such projects. So now if, let's say, we are in a culture that is not so diversity inclusion supportive, rather the opposite, and we are not even, let's say, in developing kind of country where, you know, infrastructure wise, there's so much to be done. And so let's say if the entry point is known of that, and politically, you know, as I said, maybe it's not, you know, the incentive is not there, then there's not much you could do. What I'm saying is the primary barrier actually to this approach is political kind of right alignment.
Yeah, sure. I think there are many countries where there is still a possibility to invest in infrastructure is one of the key, in fact, sector to invest in. But if there is no political will at the local, but especially the national government, national level, so sometimes also cities, city mayor, especially in not very decentralized country, they would like to do, but they don't have even the resources and the space to act, in fact. So they don't have, there is also an aspect of really political will, political space. Our experience, my experience is that when you start to work in a place, the engagement part is important. So you have to find also kind of the champion, specific even person that could support this kind of entry point. So I really work with people that or organizations. So sometimes it's the municipality, sometimes it's the national government, sometimes it's also private sector. So to find allies. And as I said, the data are key, you have to show. So you cannot just say it or come with statement, but really, and this is also a bit the problem also UN sometimes, no big statement, but you really need to have local data and show what is happening. And through pilot, I think through this pilot, you can also convince somehow the political side. And I have had a lot of struggle also lately at the with this, but it's really a long-term thing. So you have to try again, and you fail, and you again try again. So this is the process, and I think this is really about development and be also honest somehow. Really listen to the people on the ground, being very open. Not come in with an expert, being the expert in the room, and trying to build your case. That's what I can say.
All right, thank you for your answer.
I think there is
yes, we have exactly. We have someone who just switched their camera on and is off mute, I think. So just go ahead and ask your question.
I'm sorry, I wasn't quick enough to change my name. I'm Vera Squin. I have a particular interest in your experience, Giulia, with the clash between what we are all calling for, which is systemic transformation, paradigm shifts, radical changes in how we do business and how we live together. But at exactly the same time, where many of us working in greener economies, more inclusive economies, know that there are integrative business models that could go to scale. What's your experience been in identifying who among potential financiers are beginning to think beyond aid programs? I'd like to think that cities, because they now constitute a very significant proportion of the world's population, and they have typically sometimes more cash available, not always, but sometimes more cash than others, and certainly a concentration of expertise and energy. Are cities able to make more of the kinds of networks that you represent to identify where that shift in thinking is taking place? Otherwise, we face another 20 or 50 years of more better intentions, but no real progress.
Thank you. I think this is really important questions. I think that there are like cities network that 20 years ago, nobody was talking about cities, no? Everyone was like talking about rural development in the idea, okay, if we invest in rural development, people will not move to cities. Well, we were wrong. Now, I think there is an increasing understanding of the importance of cities, and there are many cities network, no? If you think about C40, the big cities, they for sure have resources. UCLG, which is also a member of Cities Alliance, so really, which is a union of local government, which is quite broad. ICLEI, another one focusing on climate. They are mobilizing, they're becoming more visible also from a political perspective. So in the G20, I was involved slightly on the G20, especially on the development group side, and cities were there. I think for probably the second time in the whole history, cities were one of the key topics in the G20, especially secondary, what is called secondary cities. So cities with less resources and less importance, because this is the point, no? So there are cities that have the possibility to drive changes, and we have to learn, but then the question is how to transfer and support cities that don't have the same resources. And one of the key challenges for me is that still the development world focuses the instrument for funding instrument, they still focus on the national level. So there are few examples that are also from, for example, the EU perspective, still the focus on the national level, and there are some now example of funding at the local level, and this is quite interesting, I think. So developing partnership at the local level and funding directly cities, of course, is linked to a much more complex structure, because you have it's much more complex to work at the local level. But probably at the end you have, yes, we have exactly, someone is saying about twinning. There was this concept of the twinning now, quite from the 80s, I think. And I think now it's also revised more in the concept of partnership, how you can share experience between cities, really focusing really on the technical capacity, really having, for example, technical people going in another city and supporting the development of projects and plans, not just sharing. The twinning were more having events and sharing ideas, but really something much more specific on specific projects, on specific priorities.
Thank you, Beres, for this question, and Giulia for the answer. Do you have a few more minutes, because Asia had her hands up for a while? So we'll take one last question and then we'll wrap up. So Asia, do you want to unmute yourself? Or maybe Tim might have to unmute you.
Yes, I think you, well, maybe I'm unmuted now.
No, yeah, we hear you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Giulia, for a very enlightening presentation. Just to take up what you were discussing just before my question, which is about city networks and the kind of role of the expert becoming the non-expert. I'm particularly interested in that, and I'm working on my PhD on that topic, and I would like your role as or rather your point of view as a practitioner to say what the role of experts, more so the spatial experts, could be in these cities, working with the different networks and kind of rethinking the role of the architect in a way, because architects also tend to be more leaning towards wanting to be architects with a capital A. So it would be great to kind of have your view on the role of this bridging of the gap. Thank you.
I was discussing this topic today, really about what could be our role in the future. I think, in fact, probably the role of architects, traditional architects, is less important. They are less important, but how architects or people that understand the spatial dimension and facilitator at the local level of the dialogue of different actors, this role, I think, is more and more important. So I think somehow there is a gap of how architects and planners are educated and what is the need, real need on the ground globally in cities. And I think the role of architects should be exactly to understand the economic implication, the social implication, the cultural implication, understand how this takes shapes in space, and facilitate, listen. I think there is a big need also of listening to people. I mean, also politicians are not doing it anymore. They just talk. They are following also somehow the next elections, and they constantly talk and change opinions. So there is a big, for me, a need of going back, listen, understanding what people are saying, and consider also the inhabitants, the local people, like experts of their places, and really understanding what do they need, because they know very well what do they need. So it's just a matter of translating these needs into a technical solution. So this is, to me, is the role of architects, planners, and so on. And I really believe that education, university should play a much more brave role in educate a new generation of architects and planners with this global mind, with this equality perspective in mind as well.
Thank you, Giulia. I honestly can't think of a better note to end on than this really important statement, the need to listen. I think, yeah, not only include the voices of the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, but actually taking intentional measures to amplify these voices, and then also consciously and actively listening to them to translate them into political action. So thank you so much for this input today. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we absolutely admire the work that we do. I can't wait to follow it, to keep seeing what comes out of it, and best of luck for your great work on this very important topic.
Thank you very much.
For all the participants, you'll receive a follow-up email from us. So you'll be getting the recording of this event, some key takeaways, and also a link to register if you want to stay tuned for future events of the Think Tank Hub. As Darius mentioned in the beginning, this is just one event in a series of fascinating guest speakers that we have invited. So if you feel like this raised your appetite for more, then you should definitely subscribe to the newsletter. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and maybe take a nice mindful walk through the urban space around you now with the rest of your lunch break.